Hello there, this is Yokesh from Besen Technologies. Welcome for the EC2 overview, AWS services. Today we are just going to see the brief things of EC2 services in AWS service. Of course, there are multiple services in AWS service. When you look at the SysOps administrations, there are some 10 core services just we have to mainly focus on. EC2 instance is one among them. Before let's start, we just see the basic things of the AWS global infrastructure and AWS other services are why it's so important when you compare to the legacy systems, how it works. Mainly there are some things when you set up the infrastructure on premises. So it required some kind of analysis as well as some calculations how the hardware and the software fits into your requirement. When you look at the AWS, so there is no some prior calculations required. Of course, some basic things are required. All we just going to do is some upfront installation where we define some of the instance types. For an example, let's say we are just set up some some web application infrastructure. For the backend infrastructure, there are some servers required to set some 3-tier architecture. So of course the database is the third one, and middle tier architecture, it's something optional one where the front end could be a web server where we just install some of the softwares it's purely customized one. So for such kind of purposes, EC2 is the required one where we need few of the configurations are customized on the server. So yes, of course, EC2 is the core services of other certifications like SysOps, architect, as well as DevOps services, examinations. And so today we just see a few of the core components are something required on setting up the EC2 instances. So these are all the components. There are many, so I just pointed out the core components when you going to set up the EC2 instance. So the first one is the instance type. So when you set up a EC2 instance on your infrastructure, you just have to see what kind of the server set are really required. There are many based on your requirement. On-demand, spot, and reserve, and few other instance types are available. Each has their own the functionalities and the characteristics. So initially when we do not define, why we are saying this one is upfront of the cloud optimization, because initially we might not sure how the instance types are defined. So in such case we can just choose on-demand instance type where we can scale out or scale in whenever it's required. So that's the core functionality here. When you look about the distributed computing, like how the AWS works, so it's a horizontal scale up where you do not need to scale in on the particular instance altogether. So for an example, if we have like 100 GB of RAM and 5 TB of hard disk on one particular server configured on premise instance, where in case we need some upgrades or something on the RAM side, all we just have to do is additionally we have to make the instance down and add some of the additional configuration, like adding up the RAM. In case of scale out functionality, all you just have to do is set up one more instance in parallel, where you can just define a new set of configuration and attach your previous the server setup. So this defines how the scale out works and how the distributed computing works. That's what the AWS provides here. So when we look about the instance type, so the on-demand is the one initially we can prefer when we are on the phase of setting up the infrastructure, where we can define the class types, how the vCPU and the memory are required based on there are many class types that start from T2 micro to TBX large and 8X large, like that. So initially, so here on the on-demand we have functionality to increase based on the application requirement, or we can also downscale it whenever it's required. And the billing process for on-demand is something hourly basis, like how we it's purely depends on the total number of hours you are going to use the EC2 instance actually. Similarly, there are other instance types. So spot is the one where you do not know the life cycle of your application or infrastructure, whatever the job you set. Then you can choose spot instance where you just have to bid your the capacity resources and where you just have to finish your work. And the one main disadvantage of choosing the spot instance is you cannot if your application is highly not prefer the interrupts or something, it's not possible to resume your application work, then spot instance is not the preferred one. Then of course there are multi other instance types like reserved instance, scaled or dedicated host, where you can achieve this functionality. In scheduled instance, what you just have to do is you just schedule your time of the instance requirement. So let's say if we just schedule the EC2 setup on weekly basis, the instance runs only on the scheduled time, and your job has to be completed within the time. Then you can choose the scheduled instance, and dedicated host, that is for the physical the server kind of you can set up, where you need some of the compliance of your existing environment, and you need some of the customization of the instance setup. You always prefer the dedicated host, whereas other types like on-demand spot or provides the virtualing computing, where dedicated hosts you can define whatever you require. So yeah, each types has its own functionalities as well as some of the pitfalls. It purely depends on how you are going to require it. So and when you look about the other components of storage, fault tolerance, when you set up EC2 instance, it also has their the specific things what you're gonna choose it. Basically, whenever you set up a EC2 instance, setting up a EC2 instance is not a big deal. So all you just have to do is some few clicks of the console. Once you log into a console, you just have to do some of the selections that leads you to creation of a new EC2 instance. So behind the scene, what you just have to look is how the functionalities really works. That's what the sysops administrator looking into it. because it has many of the fault tolerance techniques and high availability techniques, and it purely depends on the application, the availability things. So basically EC2 instance does not provide any fault tolerance. All we just have to do is some of the additional components that helps to provide the fault tolerance in a good manner. So these are all the components, like you have to set the multi-AZ things, ELB, elastic load balancer, auto scaling, and AMI. So AMI is a kind of component which helps to give the fault tolerance. Let me tell you where it's give the actual things. So again, these additional components have their own functionalities. It's about a big topic we have to deal about, and I'm sure it's not covered here when we look about the overview of EC2 instance, but I just want to give some brief about the additional components. The multi-AZ is the one where we can set up the high availability things. It is a kind of replication setup, but it's not actually a when you set up a multi-AZ instance, all it just going to do is it will do a continuous backup of your incremental snapshot. So when I say it's an incremental snapshot, let me just give an example where if you set up incremental snapshot of your EC2 instance today, if you just do some 50 GB of work, and tomorrow if you're gonna work on like 1 GB of work, and if I do a incremental snapshot, the 1 GB of the particular work has to be backed up. So it's not when backing up a data, it's not really time consuming work, but at the same time your application may suspend for few minutes, and it's recommended to set up on the non-business hours. So that comes under the snapshot things, and ELB is elastic load balancer is kind of distributing traffic network. When you set up a EC2 instance, you might choose 5 or 6. Kind of example I'm providing. If you choose 5 EC2 instance, and if your load traffic is really more, then you just have to do a load balancing of all 5 things. That has to be in a linear manner. Where this ELB comes into a picture, where you just have to impose the ELB in between your application and other 5 EC2 instance. So what ELB does is it distribute the workload uniformly to all 5 EC2 instances. There are multiple steps to configure it, and auto scaling is one among them. We have to set up a group first, ELB group, then ELB instance we have to add it, and there are some policies we have to define. Whenever it reaches some of the threshold, new instance will be spin up. So it does not require, again here it's the talk of scale out and all upfront things. Like initially, if you just set up 2 instances with ELB, it's defined. So whenever if your workload cross the limit, let's say if cross 80% of your workload, a new instance will be spin up automatically. So that's the beauty of setting up EC2 the scale out things. I'm sorry. So here there are some steps you have to deal about. Policies, if you look at, there are many other matrices you can define based on the threshold, or you can set up the percentage of cross limit, and etc. So and setting up these things are also easy kind of method when you going on the console pattern, and getting the functionality and how it's work, it's really matters. And AMI, Amazon Missing Image, is a thing. It do a image copy of your EC2 instance. Even when you set up a EC2 instance, you might see the first step is to choose the AMI. When you set up a free tier instance, there are some available free tier Amazon, AMIs. And if you look at the second, third options, you can see something called AWS Marketplace. There are some dedicated AMIs are defined, which is the highly customized one. In such AMI, it defines the software products and depends on the network and environments. There are some additional softwares are configured already on the AMI. So whenever you pick up such kind of AMI into your environment, you do not require to start everything from the beginning. It's just things are already configured. Also, there is a community AMI. Even when you set up EC2 instance and you just configure, let's go with an example. If you have some of the requirement where your EC2 instance has to be installed with Oracle product, initially if you go with the if you do not choose the marketplace, you just have to configure the EC2 instance and you have to install the products like Oracle, whatever. And once you've done all the setups, all you just have to do is you have to take backup of the AMI, so that whenever you require to set up a new EC2 instance, or if you want to scale out some of the EC2 instance, and this AMI makes the high functionality where if you go with this settings, the new instance, whatever it's going to be added, your existing one also have the same pattern. The Oracle has already been installed. You just continues your process. It's reduce your time as well. So and the next functionality about storage thing, when you set up a EC2 instance, it has few of consideration when you're looking at the storage level. Basically, it has two types of the storage which provides by the Amazon. One is instance block store and another one is elastic block store. Instance block store is a kind of volatile one. It means if you terminate or if you stop your EC2 instance, whatever the data resides on the file system gets vanished. So it's not really recommended when you going for setting up the real-time infrastructure. So people always prefer the EBS because it's a network attached storage engine where you can store the data. It persists permanently. Like even if you terminate or stop your EC2 instance, you can get the data. So when you define EBS type EC2 instance, you have get a new file system that slash with /dev sdf1, so that is the root file system. So that always be there, and if required additionally, you all have to do is just spin up a new EBS volume and mount it on your existing EC2 instance. So there are a couple of things when you look about attachment and detachment. Like when you attach your EBS volume on your existing EC2 instance, it's something it suspends your IO operation for a while, and whatever the data it's already there in the EBS volume has to be erased and the new data will be appended. So to avoid that, we have a technique called prewarming, which has some pre-setups on EC2 EBS volumes that has to be configured, so that it reduces your IO ops work as well as it increase the attach time. So it just reduce your the time of attaching the EBS volume. And finally, there are other components when you set up a EC2 instance. It's security and network aspects, how you are going to deal such kind of things when you set up a EC2 instance. Security by default, AWS provides a shared security model. It deals with your cloud computing, the encryptions, and as well as how the typical security models works on-premise. So it also has one more functionality, that is a distributed denial of service protection. So it's again automatic kind of setup which not required any manual intervention. So AWS it's automatically does for us. And these are all other components additionally we have to think about when we set up an instance on the production environment. Network filtering. So when you set up a EC2 instance, you just have to define where it's going to reside in your multi-tier architecture. So if it is a web server and where it has a EC2 instance resides on it, all you just have to do is if it is public facing, then it requires internet access. Then you have to define your security groups and routing mechanism, where you just define your IP tables, like what are all the IPs you have to ingress, take it in, what are all the IPs I have to take out. So these are all the techniques again, when you look about the security aspects of EC2 configurations. And yes, each additional component has their own functionalities, and it has to be viewed very deeply. So since it is an overview, so we are just giving something the basic things of the core functionalities. This is for the networking setups, the data when what kind of the accessibility we are providing for the EC2 instance to access from your outside region. Again, when you set up internal tier architecture, if your databases resides backside of your architecture, and middle tier and your front end architecture. So in your middle tier 2 database, it's always be an internal network that should not talk to outside of the world. So that is the core functionality, the basic things you just have to deal about. And if you set up a data, when you look about the security aspects, so there are two kinds of security things we can use. One is data at rest, and another one is data at fly. Data at rest, you can go with the encrypted file system, where the data you are going to store in the EBS volumes going to be encrypted. So where you can save your data. So that's for data at rest. And for the data at fly, all you just have to do is you have to set up a SSL certification. In case if you have a ELB metrics, you have to define the SSL in the ELB volume. So elastic load balancer, where the data when it's on the flight mode, your data will be encrypted, where it provides the another layer of security. So yeah, when we deal about the networking concept, default, if you set up a EC2 instance, like some sample EC2 instance, if you set up, that always prefer the public IP. It's a dynamic one. Every time when you restart your EC2 instance, the IP will be changed. So, and that something default one. If you want to make it as a private, all you have to do is configure a VPC and a private subnet, then that has to be assigned whenever you set up a EC2 instance. And in case if you want a dedicated public IP address for your EC2 instance, you have to purchase a IP called Elastic IP. By default it's something 5, I believe. When you go with the default configuration of AWS, you can increase as well. So you have to enable the Elastic IP in your EC2 instance, then that would be something dedicated for the EC2 instance till the lifetime of the EC2. So this is the overall things when you set up a EC2 instance. Some basic 5 components you have to look about whenever you set up a new EC2 instance on the application side, as well as any infrastructure whenever you're going to build up. So there are many, when you see each additional components, it has their core functionalities, and there are multiple things you have to look into it. And for the work or the exam perspective, this is the major concept of EC2 service. Where you get multiple questions also from this component as well. So on the upcoming things, we just see the things in depth. Thank you.